I'm Terry Shepard. Being a confident podcast guest is a skill that can be learned. And that's why I wrote How to Become a Dynamic Podcast Guest and Sell Stuff. It's a sweet and short primer that teaches you about the gear, the appearance, and the messaging that can grab and hold today's micro attention spans and motivate your listeners to take action. How to Become a Dynamic Podcast Guest and Sell Stuff. The digital version is just $1.99 at Amazon. Grab your copy today and sell more books tomorrow.
In Conversation with Terry Shepard, award-winning broadcaster, narrator, and author. A deep dive into the writer's craft with the artists and support systems who create the stories we love.
What happens when the unthinkable becomes reality and the balance of global power shifts overnight? Today, we're diving into a chilling, all too plausible future imagined in The Counterfeit, a gripping political thriller from author Dr. Ralph DeFalco. It's a story set in the aftermath of a devastating Pacific conflict where the United States has been defeated, economically crippled, and politically compromised. In its place rises a fractured nation divided between privilege and desperation, and shadowed by the influence of a foreign power determined to reshape America from within. Dr. Ralph DeFalco, it's great to be with you. Thanks for joining me.
Terry, it's a delight to be with you.
What brought the book to mind?
What brought the book to mind? If you look at trends, current trends, and if you look at history, those two things intersect and become the counterfeit. You look at the historical pattern of relations between nations. You look at the trend line of where we are in the United States today. You follow those to their logical conclusions, and you get a novel like The Counterfeit.
And the way you describe the United States has many of the factors that really feel real to us today. Was that in your thought process as well?
Absolutely. In fact, several people who've read earlier versions of this book have said this is just too real. It's so frightening. And I think that's part of the appeal of the book, is that it's not a stretch of the imagination to understand and recognize these patterns and see how they're playing out in the novel. And I think that's one of the things that separates it, for example, from other thrillers. There's no Mission Impossibly stuff occurring in here.
Well, Philip Nolan is asked to assume his brother's identity and infiltrate a powerful security apparatus. What drew you to that kind of deeply personal, high-risk mission?
Part of the appeal, I think, of the book is that you have people who are essentially struggling with issues of identity. You have a country that's struggling with its identity. You have people in America that are reframing their identities. And of course, Nolan himself is challenged by assuming the identity of his brother. So this is part and parcel of it, and it actually led to the title, The Counterfeit, because you have so much going on in the novel that is a facsimile of reality, but not the real thing.
And your novel explores loyalty, freedom, and courage under extreme pressure. Which of those themes felt most urgent to you while you were writing?
Wow, that's a great question, Terry. Writing a book like this, you see the themes get woven into one another. I don't think one really dominates the other, but they play off one another. To have the courage to imitate someone you're not and to play it convincingly requires not only a physical kind of courage, but a mental courage as well, and certainly a lot of mental gymnastics. And I think that comes out in the book. Nolan is not your prototypical hero in The Counterfeit. He's a conflicted man, and with good reason. He's basically trying on a new identity and desperate to make it work. The consequences of it not working are just too incredible to even think about.
Well, and as I read the book, I felt like Philip was a reflection of a number of attitudes in the country today. Was that on your mind as you were creating him?
Yeah, I absolutely was on my mind. There's some ambivalence there. There's some anger there. There's some resentment there. And there's also resolution. So you see all of those threads in American society today, and they play out. They play out, I think, with Nolan as he's trying to play his part. He's aiding a resistance, a rising resistance in the United States to the trends that are beginning to unwind the fabric of the country. And Nolan is anguished by that and uncertain of how he should proceed. And I hope that comes across to the readers when they pick up The Counterfeit. I hope they come away with the idea that, wow, this Philip Nolan guy is a complex man. He's not James Bond. No, of course he's not. I tried to make him a real person that people could absolutely identify with, doubts and fears and trepidation and anger, all the emotions that a normal person would have in this particular situation. He's not a marble man. He really isn't.
We're talking with Dr. Ralph DeFalco, the author of The Counterfeit. Resistance is a word we're hearing a lot today. What does it mean in the context of the story?
In this particular story, it's resistance to two things. One is the growing authoritarianism of the government, the federal government. Two is resistance to the foreign interference. In this novel, we have a UN commission that is administering a bankrupted United States. It's not as far-fetched as it seems. We've had other interventions by the UN to assist other countries, but never on the scale that we imagine in this novel. So you've got that whole epic of resistance to not only a foreign power, but also to these influences that are desperately trying to reshape America. And that's the nature of resistance in this novel. Resistance to social and cultural trends that are tearing apart the fabric of the country, and resistance to the influence of foreign powers.
You bring a unique point of view to the keyboard, having lived within the intelligence and national security community. How did your career shape the story's realism?
I spent 25 years as a naval intelligence officer, and then another 18 years working in the Pentagon. I retired from my Pentagon service as the intelligence oversight officer in the Office of the Director of Naval Intelligence. It was a very challenging and interesting job. And having seen how intelligence works on the ground, having seen the machinery of government allocate funds and resources for intelligence, certainly played a huge part in how I put together The Counterfeit.
Do you see this book as a warning, a thought experiment, or as something else?
I think all of the above is the right answer. It is certainly a warning. It is a warning that if we continue to go down some of the paths we're on, it will come to no good end whatsoever. It's also in many ways more than a warning. It's a prediction. Several people have read this novel and says, whoa, this is way too close to what's actually going on. This can't just be fiction. There's a lot of predictive element in this. And again, I think it's what happens when you draw on current trends and follow them to their logical conclusions. It's also influenced by historical patterns. We've seen similar things play out, for example, in post-World War I Germany, where you had a foreign power that took over, and the changes to the culture and what happened with the rise of authoritarianism in response to that. So we have seen this play out in history before, and it's just a little bit unusual, I think, to have it play out on the streets of America.
Why do you think we don't learn from history?
Why don't we learn from history? That is a question that's rich in two things. It's rich in lack of knowledge of history. We don't teach history in schools anymore. I'm sad to say many of our schools have neglected to really put a good history book in the hands of students. And as students mature in their education, the number of really good historical texts diminish. And I think that's part of the problem. The other part of the problem, I think, especially for Americans, is naivete. We seem to be incredibly naive, and we have an attitude, these kinds of terrible authoritarian regimes, this kind of creeping socialism that divides the country and creates essentially two classes of people, the very powerful and the rich and everybody else, that couldn't possibly happen in America. That's something that happens in countries overseas. No, never here in America. No, not in America.
We're talking with Dr. Ralph DeFalco about his fascinating book, The Counterfeit, with such a complex plot and high stakes. How do you structure the story to maintain the tension that you've done so well throughout?
That's a very interesting question. I sometimes describe my writing as writing cliffhangers without cliffs. So you can get the idea that you're dragging the reader through this complex story, but my goal was always to leave them at the end of a chapter saying, my God, I can't stop here. We've got to figure out what's going to happen next. And I think that's part of it. I think it's part of the fun of it as well. It's fun because it's in many ways unpredictable. The reader is racing along with the story. I hope they're identifying with Nolan as they're reading. And they should be left with this idea that I can't possibly stop at this point. I have to know what happens next.
Writing is also a journey of discovery for the creator. Was there anything during the process of writing The Counterfeit that surprised you?
Yeah, actually, Terry, there was. When I began writing The Counterfeit, of course, I had a very deep background in writing and publishing nonfiction. And it's quite a different experience, wholly different experience, when you have to take what you know, massage it, remodel it, shape it, and turn it into fiction. And the biggest challenge, I think, for me was a dialogue, creating dialogue between characters that not only sounded real, but was in the voice of the characters and at the same time advanced the story. That was, I think, one of the greatest challenges, to master dialogue. And one of the things that I did in order to make that work is I imagined that I was watching a movie as I was writing the book. So that helped me, I think, to frame not only scenes, but the actions and the interplay of characters. So that's, I think, what was revealing to me, was a revelation that I could change my writing if I thought of writing, imagined it as a movie.
We both know that real life takes time, and a lot of the things that you had to compress to get into the story over the course of your role might have taken months, even years to happen. How do you balance technical accuracy with storytelling mode?
That's a great question. You can get bogged down in technical details. And I think we've all read some thrillers that have a little bit too much technical detail. And I'm fortunate that I had a couple of readers on the front end who basically looked at some of the novel and said, listen, there's a little too much detail here. You're going to lose your readers. You want to keep advancing the story. So I think creating the balance between detail that's important to advancing the story and advancing the story itself is a balancing act, as you've suggested. It takes some fine tuning. The book that you read bears no resemblance to the very first draft of the novel. It was really massaged. I threw away probably 30,000 words before I found words that actually I thought worked in the novel. So it's a process. As you well know, it's a process. And sometimes cutting away is more important than putting in. The analogy I like to use, and I work with a writers group here on the island, the analogy I like to use is, think of it as you're being a sculptor. What you're doing to reveal the sculpture is you're taking things away. You're not adding. You're just taking things away. You start with the big block that you call your novel or your idea, and slowly but surely, you're chiseling away the pieces to reveal the image that is the story.
Tell us more about your journey from nonfiction to fiction. How did you learn the craft?
I think the way you learn to write anything is by reading. You start by reading. The process of writing anything begins with your ability to take concepts in words and convey them to another person. So if you start by having a well-grounded basis for anything you do, whether it's nonfiction or fiction, that's the launching. I've always believed that, especially when I wrote nonfiction, that I had to have all my facts in my hand right before I started, even before I started to write. There was no point in writing and then looking for facts. The idea is that you have the information at hand. Once again, it's that big block idea. You chisel away what information is relevant, what isn't. And I think making the transition from writing nonfiction to fiction is that many of those facts do not emerge until you begin to write the fiction, until you begin to chip away the block that's obscuring those things, which is the process of crafting nonfiction. And until you begin chopping away those pieces, you don't see them. And people are often surprised. I write by the seat of my pants when I write nonfiction, as opposed to how I write fiction. Right? I write fiction by the seat of my pants. Nonfiction, I want to be ready and well-armed going into it. So sometimes my characters in my novels will actually do things that surprise me. I'll be writing, and the next thing you know, my character's off on some tangent doing something else, and I find myself having to drag the character back or saying something that's out of character, which is easy to do. And at that point, of course, you want to say, and now wait a minute, this is not really how my character would think, how they would speak, or how they would act. And it's particularly difficult when you have dialogue to make sure that each character stays in his own voice.
Very wise. That's an important point. I think a lot of people can identify with Philip's motivations. For someone in today's real world who wants to make a difference in an area that they see as a problem, what's the best way to do that?
Making a difference in an area that you see as a problem is a challenge for most of us because most people don't want to get involved. Everybody's first instinct is to back away. Not my problem, not something I need to worry about. Activism in this country has also become incredibly polarizing. If you want to be active, and let's be candid, if you want to be active, for example, in politics, you're on one end of an extreme or another. There seems to be very little middle ground. And that's something that I explore in the novel. As you read the novel, there is very little middle ground here. People are operating in the extremes, and the rhetoric that's used, the action that takes place is all on these extremes of the political spectrum and the cultural spectrum as well. And that's why you have moments of reckoning in the novel. For example, in the novel, we have Philip Nolan meeting a woman who's a librarian, and she has a moment of reckoning with herself. After years at one end of the political spectrum, she begins to question everything that she's done in her life as an active political agent. So she's beginning to wonder, what did I do? How did I do it? Why did I do it? And those fears and doubts begin to surface with her. And it's a moment of great reckoning, a moment of great reckoning. I refer to it in the novel actually as a confession. It's a confession without absolution and a confession without forgiveness. So that's an interesting thing that happens when people move into this active political arena, take positions without the value of hindsight, or foresight, I should say. There are moments of reckoning that are coming, moments of reckoning.
You have written across many genres between your essays, book reviews, and now as a novelist. Why write?
Why write? Two reasons. One, it's a way to make your voice known and heard. It's a way to reach out and connect with other people. And it's a way for me to reach out to an audience far broader than I could ever reach had I not been writing. The second reason to do it is it's a medium that I've always enjoyed. It's a medium that I've enjoyed because it's challenging. It demands craftsmanship. It demands a certain mental agility. It demands a fire of sorts, a kind of fire in your belly attitude that you really want to get this out the door. You want to complete this work. You want to see it published. You want to see it in print. And I think that's part of why writers write. I won't say it's a compulsion. It's more like an addiction. You get addicted to it. I know people, and I myself try to write several hundred words every day. And there's plenty of stories out there about famous writers who first thing in the morning they did is they wrote. They just got up and wrote. They just had to do it. And there are other writers who are disciplined to do it by their professions or their trades. For example, journalists, people like yourself who are in broadcast media. They're disciplined in the writing and in the communications by the nature of their careers, the nature of their avocations.
Is there a question that I haven't asked you that you wish that I had?
That's a great one. How about the question of what's my favorite? Everybody asks me, what's your favorite part of the book? Do you have a favorite part or episode? It's like the old question where they ask the parents, which is your favorite child? As my father used to say, it depends on which kid is in the room. But yeah, I think I do have favorites, but it's difficult to pick. It's difficult to pick. I'm clearly quite happy with Nolan. Nolan is my protagonist. It took me a long time to find Nolan's voice, to find what made Nolan tick, especially given the conflicts related to his identity, his estrangement from his parents, his realization fairly late in his life that he had a brother that he knew nothing about, Those kinds of things come to Nolan and make him, I think, a very interesting character, but also a real character. Once again, he's someone who has doubts. He's someone who has fears. He has someone who can't reconcile parts of his past. He's uncomfortable with what parts of his past have meant to him. And the idea that he went for many years without knowing he had a brother is at first astonishing to him. And then when he finds out his brother is so diametrically different from him, almost demonically different, he finds that his brother is really a monstrous man. And now he has to imitate the monster that is his brother. He gets consumed, as you well know in the novel, by his brother's identity. He has to take it on. He has to wear it like a second skin. And I think that's part of, you asked me, what's my favorite? It's hard to pull out one incident, but I do have the incident that many people look at and say, wow, is where Nolan first meets one of his recruiters, Annie, in the alley. That's one of the incidents, I think, that ranks up there. That ranks up there as a fan. In fact, I printed it out. If I could read that, I'd like to do that.
I would love it if you would.
All right. So here we are. Nolan has just gone to the accountability center where all paroled military officers have to report once a month. And he's just gone to the parole center. Now he's leaving the center and something is not quite right. Nolan lifted his head and scanned the street. Something wasn't right. He felt as if he were being watched, not just watched, but followed. And if he were being followed, he dared not make any sign that he knew it. Not until he had the advantage of position, a place he knew well enough from which to fight or to run. This thug would not be another desperate parolee he could talk around. Nolan listened behind him for the echo of footfalls and heard nothing. He searched for a patch of sun so he might see a moving shadow and saw nothing. He glanced to his left and caught a reflection in the darkened store window across the street. A hooded figure, long, heavy coat, hands in pockets, tall, a man keeping to the shadows, maybe 35, 40 yards behind, quiet. Nolan knew where he was. 2 years of long rambling walks had made him familiar with every street, every intersection, every building. The next corner would take him to an alcove if he turned left. The large space once open to both crossing streets had been partially walled off. He turned left and pressed himself against the wall. He would take down the shadow man as he passed by. Nolan slipped the knife from its hidden pocket, wrapped his fingers around the handle, and eased the blade free of his sleeve. The shadow man passed and hesitated. Nolan stepped forward. In one smooth motion, he took the man from behind and spun him into the wall. Nolan shoved the full weight of his body onto his left forearm, jammed it in the man's chest, and swiftly brought the tip of the knife up to the soft flesh of the exposed neck. The man threw back his head instinctively. Nolan gasped. The man's hood had fallen away, and a thick scarf had come loose in the violence of Nolan's attack. Now he stared at half a face, no ear, scattered tufts of hair on the seared left side of the head, a milky, unseeing eye, and raw pink and white burn-scarred tissue ran from the temple down the cheek and jawline to the throat he held at knife point. Nolan lowered the blade and stepped away. The hood flew back up, and a thin, scarred hand reached out for the tangled scarf. "Too ugly to rape?" she asked in a voice that failed to hide her fear in sarcasm.
The book is The Counterfeit, a fascinating, addicting story by the Renaissance man who is our special guest today, Ralph DeFalco. Ralph, this has been wonderful. Thanks for the conversation.
Terry, it's been a delight to be with you. It's a real pleasure. You and I need to talk again sometime.
In Conversation with Terry Shepard is a copyrighted presentation. All rights reserved. I'm Lisa Davis. Join Terry Shepard next time in Conversation.